But now let's assume we have a conceptual scheme. All these problems about...
We've got a view of the world.
Well,
I
say, I'm not sure one has to do it in terms of a total conceptual scheme, but particular things. There is a lot of work going on by people influenced by James on this as to whether one looks at one description as incompatible with another, and one looks at sort of descriptions, and that descriptions, whether or not they're contraries. All of these things are being worked on. But now let's assume that we have some notion of a local conceptual scheme rather than a whole total scheme, because it may be pointless.
You don't necessarily have to be talking about a view of the world in general, but of some particular area of inquiry.
Yeah, it's very difficult to know whether a clear notion can be given to a total...
Yes.
All right, now, then let's say we fix our language, and we want, then the question of truth can arise. Then partly he seems to be asking himself the following question. What actually is the difference between saying that a particular sentence like this table is brown and adding this table is brown is true? And often maybe he can be interpreted as saying, well, prima facie it's puzzling, nothing seems to be added. And
say that a sentence is true is to do no more than a certain sentence.
Yeah, well, in a way, I mean, this may be a misleading way of putting it, but it's sort of like you can take a theory that way and then ask, well, what is added? And James seems to be suggesting that what is added is some sort of commendatory use or evaluative use, that to talk about its truth, it's to sort of say about the sentence that actually it's worthy of belief, or it's good to believe, and these kind of evaluative predicates. And then he tries to work it out, and he tries to work it out either in terms of verification or in terms of satisfaction. So sometimes he gives some view that the truth can be identified with the verifiable, or the exhaustively verified and verified by an action. One has a belief, one acts on it, and then it leads to satisfactory results. So this actual criticism of James on this point is his use of satisfaction is misleading. It has really nothing to do with truth. It may have something to do with the rationality of action. A person may be rational in believing something, even if it isn't true, but that's a different... maybe agreed to talk about the rationality of action, and for that one doesn't need certainty. But the particular issue under consideration, whether this is an illuminating notion of truth, and to many people, James is misleading how he works it out, but this general approach could be, at least in part, suggested for truth. The picture very often James once again gives is that after, or should give, is that in certain contexts, on certain kind of canonical condition, if a sentence is verified, then the question of truth may actually disappear. The gap between truth and verification might disappear or be identified. Now,
sorry, I wanted to interrupt you there because I want to move our discussion on to Dewey. We've spent a period on Peirce, a period on James, and we must leave some time for Dewey. Before we leave James, what I wanted to do was to put in a word of commendation for his writing, his prose style. I think that James is, and it needs to be said in this program about him and others, that he is one of the great writers of philosophy in the history of philosophy. Some wag once said that when you read William James's books and you read Henry James's books, you realize that Brother William was the natural novelist and Brother Henry was the natural philosopher. And the point of that joke is that William James's writing actually contains all the qualities of great creative writing. It's imaginative, it's full of surprise, it's ingenious, it's full of striking metaphor, simile, imagery, and so on. And I do want to say before we leave him that anyone who is stimulated by our discussion to go away and read James is in for a serious pleasure.
May I add to your remarks?
Yes, do.
I mean, all these three men seem to me, but in some sense remarkable, in some sense worthy of respect, but I'd like to fill out some of the things about Peirce. He's sort of an awesome figure. The tremendous issues and the variety of issues that he dealt with, logic, inquiry, a certain kind of metaphysics, He's been called by some people the Leibniz of America.
Well, when I looked him up in the current issue of the Encyclopedia Britannica for this program
Right.
to check a date, I saw that it says about him that he's the greatest intellect yet produced by the Americas. And that's an astounding
Yes, I know
claim to make for an individual.
Well, I merely also...
I'm not asking you to underwrite it,
I'm
but
just asking you that.
it is an extraordinary claim.
He seems to me an awesome figure.
Yes.
James is one of the great, lovely, admirable figures in the history of philosophy. He's a person, he's warm, outgoing. His writings range over so many topics. The Principles of Psychology itself is a classic. It's still being read and reread by a great number of people, even when they disagree with James on his specific views about psychological matters. They find him very interesting and very insightful. The other thing is also his approach to mind. He started sort of giving sort of a biological particular approach to the life of the mind, as to how one understands mental action. And Dewey, of course, was a man who was a man true to his word. He didn't merely preach that philosophers should be engaged in public life. He did, and also he didn't merely say they should be naturalists. He tried to work out the details. And his attack on all sorts of dualisms, which presumably I suppose is partly to be understood in terms of his Hegelian background, he also applied this to a variety of issues, the analysis of social issues and political issues. He has this great range. He was a liberal and a kind man. It's interesting, when Russell wrote The History of Philosophy, he sort of said he has so much admiration for Dewey, he's just sorry he has to disagree with him.